I was born and raised in Siberia, where my classical musical training as a pianist was the center of my youth. In that remote environment, my knowledge of Brazilian and Portuguese cultures was limited, except for the Brazilian band Sepultura, of which I am still a big fan today. Later, capoeira entered my life as a discipline in my fitness club, and the trainer would count dois, três, ginga. As for samba and bossa nova, my only window into these distant worlds was a telenovela called Sóror, Slave Girl, broadcast in the Soviet Union. It was only when I settled in Portugal in 2011 that I truly began to explore and become interested in Portuguese and Brazilian musical richness, discovering their deep and intertwined roots. This journey of discovery led me into a musical universe that, until then, was completely unknown to me. As I delved deeper into this world, it became increasingly evident that the musical exchanges between Portugal and Brazil, for example, were part of an ongoing and multifaceted cultural dialogue. This interchange was not limited to just these two countries, but extended to other Portuguese-speaking nations, creating an intricate web of mutual influences. Each country not only absorbed external elements, but also reinterpreted them, adding their own cultural nuances, and returned them transformed in a constant cycle of musical renewal and reinvention. Consider, for example, the evolution of Samba and Carnival, starting with the medieval roots of Portuguese Carnival, where pagan and Christian traditions intertwined. These celebrations crossed the Atlantic, merging with African elements in Brazil. From this mixture was born the lundu, incorporating Portuguese and African instruments and sounds. Samba later emerged as the heir to this cultural fusion. In a fascinating cycle of influences, samba returned to Portugal, inspiring the creation of samba schools and reinventing Portuguese carnival with a Brazilian touch. In the 60s and 70s, bossa nova and MPB arrived in Portugal as a wave of modernity and sophistication. Artists like João Gilberto, Vinícius de Moraes, and Tom Jobim became references for Portuguese musicians. This movement profoundly influenced artists such as José Afonso, Sergio Godinho, and Fausto, who incorporated elements of Brazilian music into their compositions, blending them with Portuguese traditions. MPB, popular Brazilian music, with its elaborate poetry and political engagement, resonated strongly during the last years of the Estado Novo and in the post-Carnation Revolution period in 1974. The Brazilian tropicalist movement of the 60s, led by artists like Caetano Veloso, Gilberto Gil, and Os Mutantes, had a significant impact on the Portuguese music scene. Their experimental approach, mixing elements of international pop culture with Brazilian traditions, inspired a new generation of Portuguese musicians. Artists like Antonio Variçois, for example, incorporated the aesthetics and attitude of tropicalism into their work, blending traditional fado with rock and pop. This movement encouraged Portuguese musicians to rethink their own traditions and experiment with new sounds and styles, contributing to a renewal of Portuguese music in the 70s and 80s. Even earlier, in the 30s and 40s, many Brazilian artists established themselves in Portugal, fleeing Getúlio Vargas's Estado Novo. These artists brought with them new rhythms and styles. In the 60s and 70s, during the military dictatorship in Brazil, several Brazilian musicians went into exile in Portugal, especially after the Carnation Revolution in 1974. In the 80s and 90s, there was an increase in Portuguese migration to Brazil, leading to a renewed interest in Brazilian culture in Portugal. And in recent decades, there has been an increase in Brazilian migration to Portugal, evolving the musical fusion once again. My own composition, Sobrevoo, exemplifies this fusion. Originally composed on piano in neoclassical style, it was later versioned in bossa nova Brazilian jazz. This project brings together a Siberian composer, a Portuguese producer, a Brazilian singer, and a Spanish jazz guitarist, creating a work that returns to Brazil a familiar sound, but with a European touch. This multicultural collaboration illustrates the continuous evolution and intertwining of Portuguese-speaking musical traditions and beyond. It was a special and emotionally charged moment when I attended the premiere of the opera Sóror Mariana at Teatro Tempo in Portimão, Portugal, on July 28th. The production, under the musical direction of conductor Antonio Alves Pereira, pianist Jefferson de Mello, and Gahad Hajar, who restored the opera and was the stage director, brought to the stage the impressive performance of Brazilian singer Michel Tomás, a dear friend and a greatly talented artist, in the lead role. Furthermore, Michel Tomás is also a singer in my own musical project, the Svetlana Bakushina Fusion Project, which is dedicated to interpreting original music based on folklores from different cultures, blended with jazz fusion style. The opera, composed by Júlio Reis, was presented in European Portuguese, unlike the Brazilian version, which uses Brazilian Portuguese. The trajectory of Sóror Mariana is a fascinating intersection between cultures. Composed in 1920 by Júlio Reis, a renowned Brazilian composer born in Niterói in 1863, the opera is based on the passionate letters of Mariana Alcoforado, a 17th-century Portuguese nun from the convent of Nossa Senhora Conceição de Beja. Júlio Dantas wrote the play Sóror Mariana, which later became the opera's libretto. These letters, published as Portuguese letters, reveal a story of forbidden love between Mariana and a French officer, bringing to light the drama and intensity of human feeling. The cultural significance of this European premiere is profound. Reis's work not only exemplifies the exchange between European and Brazilian musical traditions, but also highlights the growing recognition of Brazilian music on the global stage. The presentation in Portimão marks the first time the opera has been staged in Europe, after almost a century since its composition, showing how music can transcend borders and unite cultures. Being present at this event was a privilege and a testimony to the rich cultural tapestry that links Portugal and Brazil. As the founder and artistic director of the VilaNova Chamber Music Festival, held in Monchique, Portugal, with the support of the parish council and the presidency of José Gonçalo Duarte Silva, I am pleased to announce the third edition of the festival. The event has established itself as an important meeting point for chamber music and its cultural influences. In the first edition, I presented a harpsichord concert in the historic church of Nossa Senhora do Pé da Cruz, whose name refers to the Pietà, the image of Our Lady with the body of Christ after the crucifixion. The program included Zangu se cravo com a rosa by Heitor Villa-Lobos, a piece that plays with words between the flower and the musical instrument, celebrating the Brazilian cultural heritage and the local historical context. The title Zangu se cravo com a rosa has a clever dual meaning in Portuguese. It can be translated as both the carnation got angry with the rose and the harpsichord got angry with the rose. This wordplay stems from cravo, meaning both carnation, flower, and harpsichord, while rosa means rose. The title thus creates a whimsical scenario blending nature and music, typical of Villa-Lobos's creative style. The Church of Nossa Senhora do Pé da Cruz, built in 1682 with donations from residents and under the guidance of Afonso Anés, is an important historical landmark in Monchique. The name Pé da Cruz refers to the Vera Cruz, or true cross, found by Saint Helena and taken to Rome. Fragments of this cross were distributed to churches around the world. Until recently, May 3rd was celebrated in Monchique with the Festa de Vera Cruz, which included music and community celebrations, reflecting the connection between local history and the legacy of Portuguese navigation, as Brazil was discovered on that same day. Speaking of the musical influence of one country on another is, in fact, a much more complex topic than it might seem at first glance. It is not a mere unidirectional transmission of styles or rhythms, but rather a multilateral synergy that develops over time,